So without further ado, I just want to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Kobe Abayomi. He's a Senior Vice President of Data Science and Analytics at Warner Music Group. Dr. Abayomi is a trained probabilist and statistician with over 20 years of creating and applying and publishing theoretical and methodological statistics. He's the Senior Vice President of Data Science Warner Music Group and has also served as a professor of industrial engineering, probability, and statistics, environmental science at Georgia Tech, and also Universidad de Cuenca and Binghamton University, and also Howard University. As a consultant, he has worked with the United Nations Development Program, the World Bank, the Innocence Project, and the New York City Department of Education. Dr. Abayomi is co-author of 2 pending patents in Malafy's discovery and recommendation engines and is widely published in statistics, environmental science, and environmental economics. He holds a PhD in probability and statistics from Columbia University and also held postdoc positions at Duke and Stanford. So we are really excited to have this innovative presentation today on the sounds of data science, a story of innovation at Warner Music Group. Dr. Abayomi?
I'm unmuting myself. I'm gonna share my screen and turn my video on. Share screen. Here we go. All right. Can you guys see the screen?
Yep, perfect.
All right, perfect. I won't play the song again. Hopefully some of you heard it. It's relevant for the poll that you'll take. But some of you heard a bit of this song. It's a really great tune. I think 1973 this came out, or 72, maybe 72. Labi Shifra, the name of the song is I Got The. And so when the song switches from the first couple stanzas to the really extended different bridge, it's quite a different song. And if you've listened to music in the last 10, 15 years, you'll recognize immediately where that part of the song ended up. So that's one of the polls, and I'll say it later, the rest of the talk. So thank you guys for having me. Thanks for being here. I love to spend time talking to the young people, and it's nice to hear somebody else read your CV, although it does make you feel old. The older you get, the more things are on it. So the longer it takes, it just means you're closer to death. So, but thank you, Dr. Washington, for the intro. It's nice to put pictures of my kid on things. People seem to like that. And it's also nice to put an outline at the start to sort of talk about the things that we're going to discuss. When I talk to students, younger people, I like to do a little bit autobiographical. You know, we're all real people, and we end up in these professions, taking paths through lives just like the ones that you're embarking on. And so I like to illustrate how it goes, how it can go, what it was like for me, so that as you make your way through society to achieve the things you want to achieve, you realize these things are doable. So we'll start off with a little bit from the beginning. This is a picture of me, my 2 sisters. I was just a kid. I liked taking things apart. What I want to say here is it's very important to have a scientific identity, to really just to be inquisitive. And so that's one of the things that, you know, my parents gave to me and have given to a lot of us that allow us to endeavor to scientific careers, right? I've got a 12-year-old child of my own, and I'm always saying to her that the curiosity has to come from her. And if you have that sense of curiosity, that's what you rely upon as you start your path to becoming a scientist. So I like cars, I like taking things apart, and that was my first foray into science, was dissecting plastic toys, getting to the little generators and batteries that would drive them, seeing if I could connect the generator to something else, seeing if I could connect the battery to something else, learning about current, pulling plugs out of walls, dropping pennies on them, learning about AC current and how it would pop a fuse in a house. Just a really inquisitive mindset is what started me off. I was lucky to have a mother who was a mathematician. But having said that, I got to the point in my early, I'd say, mathematical education where I just wasn't getting it from her. And I owe so much to my parents. This slide here is an illustration. When I was in high school and I was not getting algebra, it just would not make sense to me. And I remember my mother, Jamaican mother, telling me about getting X on the other side and being frustrated, talking till she was blue in the face, and me not getting it. She went and got me a tutor. We lived in New York. We were lucky. She was lucky to find African American man who was a computer scientist, and he taught me chains of basis. He taught me a little bit of vector algebra. Taught me, ninth grade version. Told me a little bit about quantum mechanics, and it re-excited my interest in mathematics and allowed me to sort of, revisit and come back to the things that I was having a hard time with because of the way that they were coming to me pedagogically. That's a gift, and that's something that I like to say. I still teach. I teach to undergraduates. What we offer when we teach is sort of canonical, like this thing, that thing, the other thing. But these things developed in an almost sort of organic religious way, right? And when we present them to students, we're just presenting the things that sort of fell out and worked. But there's all sorts of, the world of mathematics is broad and wide. And if you're finding yourself at a brick wall and understanding and comprehension and part of it, there's other ways around things. And that's sort of what I learned and got from my mother finding me a tutor at a young age. So this is not a picture of my mother, but a picture of my niece who looks just like my mom. Another thing that I want to emphasize, and you'll see in the rest of the talk when we get to the sort of more technical part of it, a big part of mathematics is computation. And these days, computation is via programming and computers. My parents got me a Tandy 1000. I remember that in 1986, and $1,399 at your local Radio Shack, and it looked just like this. It had a green CRT. We didn't get the 2 floppy disk one. We had the 1 floppy disk. It didn't have a hard drive. Every time you started the thing up, you had to start from scratch. And I just played around on that, learned how to program. The things I had learned about logic that my tutor had taught me, I used to understand programming languages. And this little image here in the middle is a lead apron that you would use if you were working on something radioactive. So as much as my parents wanted me to learn and use the computer, they were also very old-fashioned and just they just believed that there were x-rays coming out of this computer. So every time I wanted to use it, I had to put on this 50-pound leather apron and then sit with the apron on while I use it. So I'd be up at night with this apron on, and my parents were checking me to make sure I hadn't taken it off. But that was their commitment, despite the superstition, to me being able to learn how to do things. And they could see that a big part of being able to do things in the future, in the 80s, was going to be computation and computers. So then I went to schools. I went to, I graduated from Georgia Tech, did my doctorate at Columbia, postdoc at Duke, postdoc at Stanford. And I was an industrial engineer when I was undergrad. And from that, went into statistics. I started off just getting a master's degree. And my initial plan was I was going to get a master's degree and I was going to go make money being a lawyer who did statistics or something like that. But I had always worked in environmental science. I had a job. That was my job in grad school. And I was working on a project where we needed to discover some methodology. I started working with a professor at the school, and he liked what we were doing methodologically. And he said, oh, you should stay for grad school. When you tell somebody in their 20s, more school, you don't have to change your life. We'll pay you a little bit of money. Dream come true. So I stayed, and the rest is history. Doctorate, a couple postdocs. And then I went on to go become a professor. Along the way, and this is something I recommend to those of you who are considering graduate school, after you finish your courses and take what are called your comprehensive exams, see if you can find, excuse me, a pre-doctoral fellowship, preferably one where you're required to teach. I'm quoting the great Richard Feynman in saying that when you really want to learn something, you should teach it. And so I was lucky to find a predoctoral fellowship at Haverford. That's the angry squirrel, their mascot, and have to teach for the first time, things that I was working on, parts of my dissertation. And I tell you, it helped me immeasurably, really having to think things out when you have to explain them to people. And so I highly recommend it to other people. I taught at Duke, taught at Georgia Tech, Binghamton, University of Cuenca, and I still teach. I have an appointment at Seton Hall here in New Jersey, where I live, still teaching undergraduate statistics and graduate statistics and operations research. And and I see it as like it's part of my craft, right? Like I'm a statistician, I have a job, obviously working at Warner Music Group, but you have to get on the piano, and play. And for me, that's what teaching is. So then middle 2010s, I left academia, and the first job I got out was for a credit rating company, Dun & Bradstreet. Dun & Bradstreet is a business-to-business credit rating company, meaning that they don't have credit files on me or you, they have it on organizations, IBM, Home Depot, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's probably the perfect job for a statistician to get. Their commerce, the lingua franca of the business is information. And at that time, they were involved in what became a lot of the technology that's developed around advertising, ad tech, some of which I rely upon now, the things I learned then and learned in doing data science for advertising technology in and at the Warner Music Group. Specifically, how to be able to pick up digital behaviors from online signals, how to be able to join data, which has information about firms or entities, to other data, which has information about the same firms or entities, but they're not identified, right? Like, I want to find John in two different data sets. What things do I know about John here? What things do I know about John here in the other data set? And how can I join the things that I know so that I can get back to re-identify people? This is a big part of advertising technology. And it's a big part of what we do, or what my group does at Warner Music Group. So this was a little bit before I start talking specifically about what we do at Warner Music Group. I like to say this, and this is again me quoting somebody else. So many of the things that I say in life are me just repeating stuff I heard. I was lucky to have another pre-doctoral sort of internship at the University of Chicago when I was doing environmental statistics for a really fantastic statistician. And I remember him saying to me one day, statistics is all about grouping. And having done this career for 20 something years, no truer statement. How do I group things together? What are the ropes I put around data, right? And that's really a big part of what you do as a statistician, figuring out how to classify things, what's training, what's the process, and where it applies and where it doesn't. So I would say grouping, experimental design, that's what statistics is. I like to say statistics to the kids who I still teach, it's the science of experimentation. And it's your job to figure out what the underlying experiment is, right? Because that defines what you can say about what's going on. So we go from grouping things to being able to make illustrations, having processes, and using different types of statistics. But it's the fundamental, engine or activity is pretty constant. How do I group things? What's the underlying experiment? And that dictates the functions we apply, the pictures we make, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so let's talk about working in music. Just want to go forward. So let me go. So since 2020, was it 2020? Yeah, since 2020, I've been working at a Warner Music Group. These are some of Warner Music Group's artists. And so I work in the music business. There's a whole trope about the music business, right? Anybody who listened to rap or rap in the 90s or saw Prince write Slave on his face has a narrative or story about the music business, right? So there's a duality between music itself and then sort of the commodification and production of it, and the ability to push that forward and make money from it. So first, a little bit of music. Oh, one of my favorite songs. I know there's a few of you out there who know what group this is, who the lead singer of this group is. This is Jeffrey Osborne's first group out of North Carolina. This is off of their first album. Jeffrey Osborne had a whole career in the 80s, beautiful career. He did songwriting, production, and front-end vocals himself. What I would call an evergreen track. A song that, as its vintage increases, i.e. as it gets older and older, the generation who heard it, enjoy it, and when we play it to new segments of the population, they enjoy it. Sort of, you know, the other evergreen tracks like Phil Collins, Air Tonight, Air Tonight. Let me just look at the part of the build the vibe. Just a great song, and there's so much going on in that song, and I can talk about that later, maybe during Q&A. There's so many different musical features that are of that moment, musically, and what was going on production-wise, that are there in that song, that are resonant and that people enjoy and, you know, listen to in the 80s, listen to in the 90s, listen to now, right? People still pulling from these musical forms. So there's the music side, which is beautiful and lovely and pristine. And then there's the business side, which is, you know, got to make a buck, right? And what I can say, that's an introduction sort of about the music businesses, changes a lot. All of media has changed. One of the things I like to say in these sort of talks is, one of the reasons that media has changed a lot over the last 2 decades, the last decade in particular, this device right here. We've gone from consuming things in ways that are difficult to measure to consuming media in ways that are very easy to measure, right? Through these smartphones. So smartphones, 2009, 2010, started taking off. Everybody started getting these smartphones. Our behaviors now can be viewed through these phones. You know, marketing before then, I remember being back in college and getting side jobs working for marketing firms and going to focus groups, and them asking you questions about like Budweiser and stuff like that. Marketing back then, right? Understanding people and how they consume things, what they like. Now we can do it in an active way. It doesn't have to be passive. There's trackers on phones, information, cookies, and that space is changing a lot. But all of the data generated from those devices, and I like to say that it's coincident with the rise in so-called data science. Now, at the beginning of 2010, we have people consuming media, engaging in a digital way with one another, generating, you know, reams and volumes, terabytes of data, and at the same time, computation is better. And so a lot of the things that statisticians have been thinking about for 20, 30 years, now you can apply them to real business use cases, and you have the technology to do so. Music is no stranger to this. If you remember in the early 2000s, people, these online file sharing sites became ubiquitous. I don't think anybody paid for any music between 1999 and 2003, 2004, right? Napster, a fundamental sort of existential problem the music industry had on on how they were going to be able to get compensated for the content that they produce and the licenses they held. Middle 2000s music industry suing grandmas for downloading a Glenn Campbell song or something like that. And what really shifted and changed the music industry's model and saved them, I remember being in a bar in 2002 and somebody walking in with something about the size of a small loaf of bread. It was an iPod, right? And I remember it had an LCD screen, you could save songs on it. And I was like, oh, okay. That's now the mode of music, and even more so, right? People downloading has become inferior to streaming. So we went from digitalization to piracy to downloading to streaming, and that's really what turns it. So now you see not Netflix, Spotify, which has been around, I would say, since the late 2000s, but really started taking off 2014, 2015, provided the music companies with an alternate way to monetize their product. And the model is, and I would say 80%, maybe a little bit more of the money coming in the door is through streaming subscriptions, people listening to the smorgasbord and world of music available all the time, either ad supported or subscription supported. And now we have this new mode where people not only listen to music, but they engage with it by creating content that's mirrored and shaped off of it, user-generated content, TikTok videos and things like that, right? And so all of this is more listening, more of the attention budget going towards music listening, and a way for the music companies to be able to monetize those behaviors and activities. So it's a really, I would say, a sort of a Pax Romana right now in the music business that streaming and digital consumption has provided. At the same time, this new mode brings new challenges, which is, do people listen to music in the same way? How do we support, create, curate music under the Warner Music umbrella? Any label's worried about this. Anybody's worried about this. How do I get fans? How do I increase listening of the thing that I'm creating in this new digital space where the activity isn't going to Tower Records and buying a record, or going to the local DJ shop and talking to whoever's on the turntables at that time about what's next, but consuming things online instead of consuming albums, consuming tracks? How are these people marketed to? How do you support and drive fan acquisition in this new space? I like to show these things here. Well, the first one, this is a panel from a magazine back in the 70s. And what it is what I would say cross-genre marketing. Besides the Weird Third Eye thing, what they're pushing here are two albums from two different genres. One, progressive rock, Blue Oyster Cult, and another one, this is straight jazz, acid jazz, Weather Report. But whoever wrote this ad up was sophisticated enough that even though these sound very different, the likely consumer might be the same person. Somebody, if they're listening to prog rock, they likely listen to acid jazz too, right? And so the challenge now is how to pick up on these sort of resonant pockets of behaviors, listening affinity digitally. And in doing this job, and so this is a picture of me, this was actually at my wedding, I took over for the DJ that we hired because I used to be a DJ, that's how I made money in college and grad school. And I try to apply the same sort of notion to what I do here. As a DJ, you're trying to understand an audience and you're trying to curate it. They're listening, you want to get them to dance, and you want to push them a little bit. You want to offer them something different. You want to play the same songs everybody else does. You want to create orthogonality and newness. And then this last graph here on the right is just an illustration of a hierarchical model where you're able to fit a model which is very similar but to different sort of tranches of the population. And that's one of the principles we use in my group, is to try to have a modeling suite that you can modify, but is relatively stable in its ability to sort of take in business levers and output business outcomes. this picture here, so audience, one of the things we're finding as we study these reams of data that we get from people's streaming and digital consumption is that the notion of genre and similarity. So this is one of the themes that we work on, and they have statistical analogs. The notion of genre and similarity as far as sound and artist is a very malleable thing, right? I would, the old days, you would have a jazz label, you would have a so-and-so label, and the labels are still constructed in these sort of top-down forms and understanding of genre, but the way people listen to music when they're presented with the entire smorgasbord of it, very different. Like genre, if you want to interpret genre as sort of a class of music that people listen to and sort of a coherent audience, it differs by time of day. You can take a group of artists and a group of their tracks and then look at how it clusters and coalesces in the morning, and then look how it clusters and coalesces in the evening. Very different, right? Like dance music at 9 o'clock is very different from dance music at 6 o'clock. Dance music at Tuesday at 9 o'clock in the morning is very different from dance music Friday at 11 o'clock at night, right? Like we know that because we're consuming the music this way. These are the sort of things that we can quantify now and offer to the business as insight. The sound itself, right? So one of the beautiful things about how sophisticated we've gotten in computation is we can take the actual content, the actual product, and quantify it in a mathematical way, and then use that quantification to illustrate and create categories, and then relate those categories to people's preferences, so that at scale we can understand what audiences like what at what time, what things resonate, what things don't. These things are important not only for marketing, but for creating music itself. I've been passing around this video that you should try to check out. It's available on Amazon. I might have bought the last couple of DVDs, but there may be a couple left. So it's a documentary about James Ambrose James Jr., whose stage name is Rick James, and his career, long story career. Rick James didn't become Rick James until late 70s, early 80s. He had been around. He had other groups. What was his first group? I can't remember the name of his first group, and experimenting with different sounds and experimenting with his identity. You get to a point in the documentary, and one of his producers is having a conversation about the production of Super Freak. And so Super Freak comes out, and I think that was on Street Sounds. And I think this is like, it's got 85, 86, something like that. I may be off on the year. But what else is going on in pop music at that time? What's going on in pop music is you have new wave, you have that heavy synth sound, Devo, bands like that. Rick James realizes this, and he wants to put into this track something that will get an audience that likes that stuff. I'm just going to say it straight. He wants to put in a synth sound that people, the new wave ear, which is a pop audience, which is a white audience, will respond to. And when you listen to the song, you hear it. You hear it, and it doesn't sound cacophonous. It sounds different. It's in there. And I remember as a kid, that thing catching my ear. And so all of these things go into the creation of music, right? This thought and this understanding of the audience that's going to respond to it. So the way that we organize our activity in my group is to see everything as an offshoot from our ability to forecast. And so forecast in the sense that with these inputs, what might happen? It's basically just conditional expectation of, given this and the concert of these other things, if I change this thing, what else might happen? And so the givens, the predictors, the covariates we use are, genre classification, time of day, place in the world, and all of these effects, and we use a random effects model, go into that model. There's work, and you'll find this for those of you who are in data science careers or going on to some, you don't just walk into business and find all of the data already organized. A big part of what you do is organizing things so you can do statistics on it. So if you remember back, What statistics is science of experimentation. You want to arrange data so it models some sort of reasonable experimental design so it can be operated on, so you can draw inference and you can offer insight to the business. So we spend a lot of time gathering data from a bunch of different places, featureizing it, which is turning log files and other sorts of data, non-structured data, into things that can go into ordinary statistical models, and then presenting that in a coherent way. We spend time gathering data from different sources. So one of the things I talked a little bit about advertising technology and be able to figure out who John was in 2 data sets. So that's called fusion, being able to take 2 data sets and probabilistically join them, right? They don't have a primary key that responds, so that corresponds in either set, but they have information that is associated, and you use the associative information. This person is in this area of the country or this zip code, this other person is in this area or this zip code, high probability of these 2 being joined, fusion. And we spend a lot of time joining different data sets so that we can do inference on audiences and their behaviors. And then we spend a lot of time thinking about similarity in terms of the artists, in terms of the sounds, and we do a lot of modeling around that. The overall, I would say, large structure macro model we use, cause and effect, or sort of conditional cause and effect, if you will, hierarchical model. But along the way, the pieces that feed into it, some of them are neural network based, some of them are distance based, embedding based models, and it all feeds into our ability to understand this cause or covariate and the overall effect on listening demand. So we spend a lot of time working with consumption data, the data we get back from our streaming providers, the Apple Musics of the world, the Spotify's of the world, and using that information to figure out what an embedded space looks like based upon consumption, right? Like, so how to quantify. So for instance, here, this is an illustration of Roddy Ricch, a Warner Music artist, and consumption-wise, who's close to him. So an embedding based upon consumption. And then we take all of that, process it into predictions on how a track will perform, what the best allocation of advertising spend. Songs are marketed through digital media channels, through Google AdWords, through Spotify itself. And we can take data, past historical data on what was spent, how it worked out. And that's, highly resolved and very specific. What works for Roddy Ricch will not work necessarily for Lizzo. And so these recommendations, because the data are finally resolved and at scale in particular, the recommendations we offer to the business are as well as particular. And then all of that, once you're able to sort of predict what might happen, and you can think of this as if you were looking at your phone and doing a GPS, right? Your GPS takes in traffic signals from everybody else's phone. You're trying to get from here to there, and it offers you an optimal path based upon, I see the signals are moving slow here. I reroute this to another path here. This is operations research and optimization, and we offer that, right? Given factors, covariates, business levers, expected outcomes, what are the best sort of paths to take? What is resonant across streaming platforms, right? Like, if this happens on TikTok, is it likely to predict something on YouTube? What does that mean for Spotify? What is the input for radio? And having the whole thing work together is an optimization scheme. These last 2 slides, and so these last 2 slides, something we're working on now, and there's a sound a bit after this that I'm going to end the talk with that's important for this. So one of the things that we want to be able to do thematically is offer to the business insight on where there are new pockets or affinities of listening, where a new genre might be popping up, right? We saw over the last 5 to 7 years a resurgence in reggaeton, and what's that other one, that Gasolina song? I forget what they call that. Dembow, right? Ended up becoming a Latin genre, started off as a Shabba Ranks song. These sorts of things. And so every music company would kill somebody's mother to figure out what the next hot genre is going to be. And this is an activity we're engaged in, and then we're using classification, open set theory to try to figure out in the music map that we already have, and by music map I mean the sound content as information, the audience's response to it as consumption, to figure out where there are patches that are fertile for mining for genre detection. So let me go through these examples here. I just love these examples. And one of the things, this is related to that, but this is just, something I've noticed being a DJ, and an example I use for my group when we talk about working in audience in genre detection. So listen to this first track here. Okay, so this New Orleans Mardi Gras second line music, what you hear there, among other things, is a really particular type of snare drum, almost metallic snare, electric guitar, and these weird sort of call outs, right? Playing the role of the bass guitar. This sound, which probably had an earlier antecedent, was a popular sound for a lot of DJs. I told you I DJ'd in the early middle 2000s. And one of the best examples of this sound was this group called the Meters, which didn't receive a lot of popular flair when they came out. There was another group that was in a similar space, and I never know how to pronounce their name, Samandi, a similar sound. Let me just let you hear it. You'll hear the similarity in the sound. So you hear the same thing, metallic snare, the tom is right there on top of it, the electric guitar playing the role of the bass guitar. It's the same sound, right? These people heard, listened to, understood the second line music. So now this next song, probably the biggest hit in this, when I would say, if you want to call it genre American wise, I can't remember when the song came out. This turned the production on this, and the guy who knew this sound and was able to apply it to this particular track, turned this artist from a one-hit wonder into a two-hit wonder. And I love this song. And when it came out, I thought that it would engender, foster, sprout a new genre of American music right around it. It's similar to how New Jack Swing sort of became its own thing, but very different sound. And let's listen to it for a second. Okay, I could listen to that forever. Straight from the meters, right? That's Sissy Strut, basically looped around, and then as the song goes on, you get to hear some nice house music type of chord. It's a beautiful composition. Strangely, that did not end up in a sort of flowering new genre around it in American music, and I still think that's an area to be mined. But where else do you hear this sound? In other markets, very popular. So let me play this for you. Sergio Mendes, the original version of the Sergio Mendes track.
Vem Magalenha Rojão, traz a lenha pro fogão, vem fazer armação. Hoje é dia de sol, alegria de coió, é curtir o verão.
Vem Magalenha Rojão, traz a lenha pro fogão, vem fazer armação. Hoje é dia de sol, alegria de coió, é curtir o verão.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Brazilian carnival music, right? And so this brings us all the way back to the second line, to the tradition for Mardi Gras. And you, when I talk to the people in my group, and we're data scientists and statisticians and mathematicians, and really this is a comment on everything, not just statistics or mathematics. It's really all the same thing. Like we are all really just people. And what you're hearing is the sounds of a group of people who spread throughout the Caribbean, who ended up in New Orleans, in Creoles, in Brazil, in Bahia. This is a similar sound. And when you're looking and trying to develop something that you're going to commodify and try to push on an audience, what you're appealing to is people's sort of cultural reference, things in their DNA that they maybe didn't even know were there, right? And this is why I think this is such a beautiful field to work in, because at the end of the day, you're just trying to give people something that's resonant with their spirit and their soul. So let me give you, here's another example. This is the Mendes track turned into a dance music song.
Vem Magalenha Rojão, traz a lenha pro fogão, vem fazer armação. Hoje é dia de sol, alegria de coió, é curtir o verão.
Vem Magalenha Rojão, traz a lenha pro fogão, vem fazer armação. Hoje é dia de sol, alegria de coió, é curtir o verão.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So that is Spinnin' Records is a Warner Music a label. And then let me just give you this one last thing. Let's go for me. There. This one last thing here. And this is the last slide. This is just a picture of me dressed up as a bear, my kid, dogs, some Warner Music artists, and a more straight up version of the same sound that's coming from New Orleans second line. So I think there's a lot to be mined there. I think that this is this could be the next new jack swing, right? This genre of music, and to push this in popular music. But this is some of the work we do, and it's beautiful work, and I'm glad to do it. Thank you.
Great. All right. So I know some people, they want their questions. They have some questions for you, Dr. Abayomi. You can
All
stop
right, all
sharing your
right.
screen now.
Okay.
So I want to make sure we get to the questions and also the poll readout. So just quickly for the poll readout. So when we ask what's your status, we have 90% are graduated working professional, which makes sense because the students are on spring break this week. And so thank you for joining us. And if you're a student, what level are you? We have a few masters, a few PhD, and most are not students, but we're lifelong learners. And let's see, where do you currently live? About 36% or 15 are from Georgia, and 64% are from outside of Georgia. So thanks for joining us today. And the question 2, what state did Heat Wave, Slave, Lakeside, and the Isley Brothers come from? Well, 67% said Ohio, the majority. Is that right, Dr. Abayomi?
That's right.
Yay. Okay. So which famous Detroit rapper sampled I Got the ... Well, the highest selected artist there was Eminem, 52%. Is that correct, Dr. Abayomi?
That's correct.
Awesome. Some people said Big Sean and Jay Dilla. Don't even know. Some people are. Okay. So do you know the difference between an L2 and an L1, Norm? Well, 64% said no, and 26% said yes. Well, if we know an absolute value, then we know an L1, right? And we know how to, do a distance between 2 points.
Then you know.
You can think of, then you know an L2. So maybe people knew and they just didn't know it. So, it's all in the L. All right, great. Well, thank you. And so we have a couple of questions here, and I think somebody has to go. Okay, Yvonne, I don't see your question in the Q&A, but if you have questions in the Q&A, please put them there. So I'll start with the question at the top. It says, you had on slide 13, the question was, what does it say about the rare artists who had higher activity prior to Grammy Week? What does that say?
Right. Yeah, so that slide was a part of the graph. I just wanted to throw a bunch of things so people could get illustration of sort of stuff that goes on behind the doors of a music company. Worry about stuff like that, right? Did the Grammys have an effect? Is it raising or lifting artists? And generally you do, although it's short-lived. I'll say what we've noticed, and this is just, me speaking, what we've noticed over the past year in the data. And so streaming data, we have a transfer streaming data that's about 5-7 years. So I'm not making a statement about all time. I'm not saying something that's universally true, but what you notice is songs generally have a life cycle. They have a birth, a peak, and they have a death. And the death may end up being a sort of relatively moderate level of listening for a long period of time. Some things become evergreen, and that's the word I'm using and making up for this phenomena, is that something will sort of hang around and people will listen to it. These are things that when you hit it with an impulse, like for instance, some user-generated content or some sort of social media viral thing that'll pop back up and people start listening to it again. I'm thinking in particular of the example of that song Dreams by Fleetwood Mac. When there was a video of the guy on the skateboard, that re-excites interest. The song's already resonant in people's minds. People start listening to it again. But as far as direct answer to the Grammy thing, you'll see a little hit. These are recent things. These are things that haven't been out for enough time to become evergreen yet. Bumps up a little bit, falls back down.
Fine. And so let me ask her a question. It says, given that the majority of data scientists are still not from, we'll say, diverse groups or African Americans, how do you work with your team of brilliant people to ensure that their sentiment analysis codes and programs captures the essence of the cultural assets of the artist's music and lyrics, as well as any fans who may comment on social media?
No, that's a great point. That's really a beautiful point. I'll say two things. First, let me talk the social media stuff. It's my opinion, not universally shared necessarily, that when we look to model potential, and the potential these days is streaming demand, listening demand, and we just use social media signals, that we're doing a disservice, right? That we're only that we're constructing a model around data that's generated from a baked-in situation, which is what people are listening to today, what's been pushed today, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's a perfect thing to say. One of the ways to get around that, and I talked about it in the talk, is to quantify the sound itself, right? And to more, in a higher resolution, understand how people respond to sounds beyond the social media likes, dislikes, comments, to be able to understand where there's a difference between what you would predict just looking at what people are saying on social media to what you would predict having a really good understanding of how people listen to stuff and what their ear might enjoy. So that for the first part. And then for the second part about the sentiment analysis codes, programs, you know, I don't want to say something like ignorant, like I think that we deal with that less in this field because it's sound itself, because, you know, even saying something like that, like we know that genres have been classified as, like, we still talk about, you know, R&B, black music. We still talk about pop as a different thing. So I hear where you're coming from, and I'm to my group, we're spending a lot of time trying to elide or go past this notion of genre and understand the sound itself. And I hope that that's an answer to what you're raising as a concern.
Thank you. And so somebody is asking about how this can be used in therapy, maybe for autistic populations, thinking beyond consumerism and profit. You know, how are we thinking about creating sustainable and health benefits in music therapy, and how can data science provide innovations on how to do that?
You know, we have a really good business development group at Warner Music, led by somebody who has some really innovative ideas on how people can consume music. And I think one of the things that they are chasing down is how we get our, I hate to even call it a product, how we get our product into these spaces, you know, with health monitoring applications, with, you know, Apple Watches and things like that, to be delivered for different use cases. I forget the name of this group, but there's a group under the Warner Media Penumbra that produces ambient sounds. So that and they do playlists around this. And I know one of them is for studying, another one's for being calm and things like that. So the business is very interested in those spaces. Yeah.
Awesome. And so somebody's asked, is there any correlation to the increase of genre interest to violence or certain drug use? These tend to be popular statements, but this person says they've never seen the data to back that up.
That I don't know. I mean, and just so let me first say I don't know, but let me, you know, sort of give you my perspective. Well, one is sort of, you know, chicken egg. Like it's hard to you know, is it a social sort of malady that then predicts the music, that then, you know, sort of feedback mechanism? Who's to say? I don't know. But let me just say this, like, I think it's important, and I see it as important in my role to make good music and to not take the lowest hanging fruit. When I see a video and the sound isn't good, or I hear a group, a genre of music, and not everybody has this thought. This is Kobe Abayomi speaking. What that says to me is lazy marketing, lazy production. I'm appealing to the lowest possible denominator to get eyeballs or ears, and not appealing to people's sort of greater natures. Look, everybody listens to Stevie Wonder, right? Only a few people listen to mumble rap. So, you know, a business should be, if you're trying to make a product that's going to be persistent, aim for Stevie Wonder.
I like it. So someone says, does this data set modeling work push future music creations towards a commonality that resonates with the most people, or does it allow for audience clusters whose preferences deviate from the norm to find music that appeals to them?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. What I'll say is what a music business is good at is producing an artist and curating a fan base. And one of the tensions that we see now in that people can enjoy a smorgasbord of music is that you're seeing people graze, maybe more so, right? When you had to go to the store and buy your Led Zeppelin album, maybe you played that over and over again. Now you can play your Led Zeppelin album on your thing and then go play some Hot Chocolate or then go play some Montrose, right? So you have more choices. And that's something that the business is have to, all music businesses will adjust for the ability of people to land in different spaces of the music map.
Awesome, thank you. I think we have a last question. I'm going to combine them. So they're talking about theorizing and using predictive analytics in your work as a DJ. So how do you maintain creative autonomy and maintain engagement and an energetic response? And the person also asked you, as it relates to white space opportunities in the science of music, how can we infer the impact of different genres, such as hip hop's influence and contributions? It's almost a chicken and the egg. Does the music influence us, or do we influence the music?
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that. I don't have an answer. They come together, they're associated, right? Like cultural thing. We just went through that tour of basically Creole music, carnival type music, and and where it exists in the world, and found our way there and back. And it's hard to say what sort of comes first. Without answering that, I mean, but that's what I think is beautiful about working in this space, right? Like you really are dealing with sort of the essence of humanity, and not in a bad way. There's other ways of dealing with the essence of humanity, making hamburgers. But I never feel bad about this job, and I'm glad to have. If I would have known that you could join data science and music, I would have done that right out of grad school, and then been doing this for 15 years instead of just a couple.
I love it. I love it. And okay, so I'm going to ask a question. So you know how in biology you have those phylogenetic trees that try to map and categorize. I'm wondering, as I hear you speak, if you could take music and basically translate it to data science, you do cluster analysis of different genres, the underlying tones of the music, and as some sort of mapping back to where it came from historically. It's like a historical evolution, just like people have done with words and word choices, looked at the historical evolution of the words. Have you thought about that with music?
Yeah, so some of that work's been done, not by our group. This is stuff that's existed in the world. I can't remember the link. I'll send it to you afterwards. There's a website where somebody's taken a lot of the data from Spotify. Spotify is very effusive and verbose with the information they produce and their willingness to have it available to people, and has done that, created a sort of a taxonomy of sounds, right, by genre. Like this is house, this is deep house, this is trance house, and stuff like that. And it's got a really nice illustration. I just can't remember the exact URL, the name of the website right now, but I'll send it to you afterwards.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, thank you, Dr. Abayomi. And you have a lot of praise here in the chat. People saying awesome presentation. Thank you. This was delightful and informative. And somebody said you can hear all the variations throughout the diaspora, no matter where Black people live in the world, and hear those common themes. And somebody else said, thanks for your way of pulling all of this together in such a unique way. And we'd really like to hear how you're literally here, right, through the music and the data, how your worlds of both industrial engineering from the industry perspective comes along with statistics, probability, data science, and your passion for music and DJ coming all together in one sort of space. So I really like the interplay that you presented today, and thank you so much for being with us. And I think on behalf of the audience, thank you for really giving us an insightful presentation.
Well, thank you. Thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it. Okay.
Great.
Take care.